So welcome back to our investor series that we're doing for Realty Consultants Property Management. I'm here with Kirby again. Kirby, if you'll introduce yourself a little bit to our audience.
Hey, Brian. Yeah, thanks for having me again. I'm Kirby Graves. I'm a real estate agent here in the Triad, and I'm also a real estate investor. We have about 50 single-family rentals and a storage facility and a campground, all pretty interesting stuff. So glad to be on here and chat about this stuff.
Yeah, cool. And Kirby's also a client of ours at Realty Consultants. So we love what he's doing. He's doing some really cool stuff. So we wanted to bring this to you guys so he could share some of his wisdom with you. But today what we're going to talk about is kind of how to get into the deal. We talked a little bit about some of the residential deals that you were doing, Kirby, last time. But I want to talk about how to get into them, like different types of financing and whether to use cash in some cases. But one thing you really hit on last time was seller financing. So tell us about just the seller financing aspect, and then we'll go into the rest of it.
Yeah, so absolutely love seller financing. One of the main reasons I love seller financing is because you can get really, really creative with seller financing. There's no like set terms. Seller financing doesn't follow, the interest rates that are out in the public markets. Everything that's a piece of the puzzle there is something to be negotiated on and worked out with the seller.
So you mentioned earlier a little bit about one deal you did. So give us an example of what this looks like and how you use creativity to make it work.
Yeah, so there was a deal we did recently. It's 4 duplexes in the Triad, so 8 total rental units, and the deal we actually found on the MLS. Had been sitting on the MLS for a while, actually, like almost half a year, and every, I guess, investor just passed it up. And I just called the agent that had it listed, and I said, hey, what's going on? Why haven't you guys sold? I pulled comps on the properties. I knew that they were overpriced. But whenever I started talking to her, she said, yeah, the seller is actually really interested in doing seller financing. And if you guys don't know, a couple of the reasons why a seller would be interested in doing seller financing is, 1, they don't really need the money. 2, they really want to keep the income stream coming. But then probably the third most important thing is that they don't want a big tax hit when they sell the properties. For a lot of these people, especially like this particular seller, they'd own these properties for over 30 years. So when it comes to selling that property, they would get hit with a pretty big capital gains hit there because the properties had gone up in value so much. So they wanted to do seller financing, and I found that it's actually way easier to get sellers to do seller financing than what most beginners think, because there are advantages for the seller to do seller financing. On this particular deal, it was 4 duplexes. They were a little overpriced, but we were able to negotiate with the seller a little bit. The main thing that was most important to him was that we put down a considerable down payment, okay? They didn't want all the money at once, but they wanted a considerable down payment. In this case, it was $300,000 down payment. And they just had that money spent somewhere. After talking with the seller a little bit and the seller's agent a little bit, discovered that, they had plans to, buy a retirement home and that sort of thing. So they wanted to be able to have the cash to buy that retirement home that they wanted, but they also wanted to keep some monthly income going. So for them, seller financing made a whole lot of sense. This seller wanted to get the highest price possible, but wanted to avoid as much capital gains as possible for him. So we were actually able to negotiate 0% financing.
Wow.
Yes, 0% financing. And the way that works is basically, the seller wanted the $300,000 down. They wanted a specific amount of money every month as a payment because I guess they wanted to hit a certain number, okay? So because you can get really creative with seller financing, we gave the seller the 2 terms that he wanted. We gave him the term that he wanted in terms of the down payment. We gave him the monthly payment that he wanted. Okay, so then we just from experience of this, we've realized that most of the other terms are like open for negotiation, or they're willing to, do something that we like. So we were able to get 0% seller financing. The payment for these properties is about $2,500 a month. The income that we're getting from the rentals is about $4,000, so there's a good chunk of cash flows coming off of that. And every single payment, because it's 0% financing, is going straight to paying down the principal. So every month, the tenants are paying down our principal by about $2,500 a month.
That's awesome. So you mentioned that the selling agent was the seller's agent was the one that kind of gave you the heads up that they wanted to do this. But are there any kind of questions that you may ask a seller to see if you can uncover whether they would be able to do that or be interested in doing that, or if they may be not even knowing what to do?
So first, before I even approach a seller, a lot of times I'll go look up on public record to see if I can see if there's a lien against the property. For the most part, it's usually easy to look up and see if there's a lien against the property. If the property is paid off, or if they bought the property a long time ago and haven't refinanced, then they're probably in a really good equity position, or they may even have the property completely paid off. And typically when you're doing seller financing, it makes the most sense when the property is paid off, because then there's no bank that has to get paid back in the midst of this, because that's how you're going to be able to get a low down payment, because if they had to pay off a loan, they would need to get all the money up front.
Gotcha. So seller financing is obviously your favorite thing to do, and we may touch on this some more a little bit later, but tell us some other types of financing that you use. I know you mentioned commercial banks before.
Yeah, so we use like commercial banks when we're trying to wrap several properties together into one loan. And the reason we would do that is because it just makes it easier to deal with. You got one payment, it covers all your insurance, it covers all your expenses for all those properties, just based on that one payment. And then when we refinance, we can refinance the group of properties together, later down the road. And for commercial banks, they're typically looking they're not necessarily looking at your credit profile. They're looking more at what's your experience level in real estate? Have you done deals like this before? They're also looking at the properties themselves. They want to make sure that the property is going to produce cash flow. If it doesn't produce cash flow, they're probably not going to give you the loan. They use what they call a debt coverage service ratio. It's just basically like how much rent are you getting in, and how much is that going to cover the amount of debt that you're paying as a mortgage payment every month. So that can adjust the loan to value that they're going to give you. I'd say like right now, most commercial banks like that are going to give you like between 60 and 75% loan to value. And so that means that when you looking to finance a property, you gotta consider how much equity you're gonna have in it. Typically, we're gonna buy the property and then refinance into one of these type of loans, so that we are fixing up the property and building some extra equity in there, so that when we refinance, that we have less in it than we put into.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So you mentioned something that I want to make sure we hit on. That when you're doing the type of bank financing, they're looking at how much experience you've had there. So we all had to start from somewhere. So what do you do in that case?
Yeah. So for us, on the first big commercial loan that we got, we partnered with somebody that had more experience with us, and they were to helped us get over that experience gap. But even my first property that I did counted towards the experience for our whole group, because I had fixed up a property before, listed it, sold it, made a profit, even though it was a small amount. But it just showed that I've done this before. I've seen that repairs can go over budget and that sort of thing. So they want to make sure that you're prepared for those type of things. They're also going to look and see what kind of liquidity you have, see if you have money in the bank to pay for repairs if they come up. And they might require a certain amount of reserves, maybe 3 months in reserves that are sitting in the bank at the time of closing, that you could cover the payments if for some reason you didn't get rent for a while.
Gotcha. Is there any case where you would use cash for an investment?
I particularly like to stay away from cash as much as possible, but we have started holding a couple properties cash just because it makes your total loan to value across your whole portfolio look better. So if you have a few properties that you're holding cash and you have the rest of them leveraged at say like 70% loan to value, then it's going to bring down that amount that you have leveraged a little bit. So you look a little bit safer to a bank because you got a few properties that are like 100% cash flow, basically.
Well, that makes sense. So from time to time, we have people reach out to us and they're like, hey, I've got X amount of cash and I want to put it in real estate. And we typically go down the route of trying to educate them on using leverage, and this way you can get more properties. I mean, I'm assuming you feel the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it makes a lot of sense to get more properties as fast as possible. And the reason that is because when you have one property, and I tell this to all my investor clients, if you only have one property and that property goes vacant, then you have 100% vacancy.
Yep.
You know, so your vacancy risk, we call that a vacancy risk, it is really high compared to if you purchased your first property and it was like a fourplex, meaning it had 4 rental units under one roof, then your vacancy risk goes down significantly because if one of your properties goes vacant, you still have 3 other properties that are producing income. So your risk is a lot lower at that point. It's unlikely that all 4 would go vacant at one time unless something, drastic happened to the property itself. So we like spreading out the risk. A lot of people think I want to have all my cash in the property so that there's no loan on it, and they think that reduces their risk, but it doesn't necessarily reduce your risk. First of all, if somebody were to slip and fall that property, then there's a chance that they could come for 100% of that property's equity. Whereas if you had it with the bank, if you had it leveraged, there's say it's a $100,000 property, you only got $20,000 in it. Well, they only got $20,000 to come after. If you got it paid off all on that one property, they got $100,000 then to come after. Right. So it spreads out your risk from lawsuits. It spreads out your risk from vacancy. So in my opinion, it's a huge risk factor to have a property 100% paid off. We're not even getting to the financial piece of it yet, but when you do consider the financial piece of it, if you only have $20,000 into the property on a $100,000 property, if that house goes up by 10% in a year, the power of the leverage is that you're not making 10% on the $20,000 that you invested. You're making 10% on the whole value of the asset, the whole value of the house, that $100,000. So if it went up by 10%, it's worth $110,000 after 1 year. You just increase your investment by almost 50% there because you invested 20 and now you have 30,000 in equity.
Right.
So that leveraging that helps you financially in that perspective, but it also reduces your risk. So leverage is just smart all the way around, I think.
Yeah, I've never thought about it from the liability standpoint, but that's a really good point. So with the different types of financing, is there one specific financing vehicle that's better with a certain asset? Like, for example, let's say you're doing multifamily or commercial, and I know you do a lot of different things, which we'll talk about later. But is there one specific financing vehicle that maybe you need to use with one certain asset?
Yeah. So. For example, we have some non-warrantable condos. Those condos, not every lender is willing to put those into like a portfolio with other properties. So you have to make sure that you find a lender that's willing to do that. For the most part, in the commercial loans, the houses just have to fit into a box that kind of makes sense. They might have like a minimum asset value of like, say, the least valuable house that they're willing to lend on is maybe $100,000. We see that a lot. Did I answer the question there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's not like So there's not a specific financing vehicle that you would need. Let's say you were doing storage buildings.
Okay.
I'm trying to think. I don't think there would be anything there, but let's say, would you be best off to go to a commercial bank, hard money? Obviously, you might get seller financing there, but you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, we have the storage facility on those. We found that the best option to work with is like a local bank. Local banks have a lot of appetite for storage facilities, so they want to lend on that sort of thing. But when you say like a different type of like, I guess, lending vehicle, I find that depending on the asset type, you're going to have a different type or different terms associated with it. Okay. So for like a storage facility, you might only be able to get a 20-year term, whereas like with traditional single family houses, you can get a 30-year term on properties. So it does change the different terms in it. They have a different interest rate. They have a different loan to value ratio. So like for storage facilities, they only want to do like a 60% loan to value. So that lowers the amount of leverage you can get, but it makes sense. It's partially a business. So there's more working factors. There's more, there's different types of expenses. So, but from generally, they're all kind of very similar, but the terms may differ among the different types of assets.
Gotcha. Something else that you have done so far, and it's allowed you to grow your portfolio quite a bit, is you've been able to syndicate. So talk to us a little bit about syndication within the investment real estate world.
Right. So syndication is basically like just pulling a bunch of different investors' money together, taking that money out, and then going out and investing it into real estate. Okay, so we've been able to raise money from different investors, and we use that money to then go buy real estate. The benefit to that is that we're able to scale up quicker. So if it was just my funds, probably would only be able to do 1 or 2 houses a year. But because we're pulling investor funds together, we can buy, renovate, multiple houses in a year because we have access to more capital. Yes, it spreads our portion of it a little bit down, but the upside is that we have other people to reach out to if for some reason we were to get in a bad position. So there's a lot of benefits to syndicating properties and financing them in that way.
Are there any kind of pitfalls you need to watch out for when you're doing that, like legal issues or anything like that?
Absolutely. You just touched on the biggest one. So the main thing with syndications is you gotta set up the business in the proper like legal format. There's a couple different ways that you can get in trouble there, but mainly is if you're going out and reaching out to the public about investing into a company, the SEC looks at that as you selling securities into a business. They're not looking at it from a real estate perspective. They're looking at this as like you are investing into a business. So you're buying stock in a business. So you're regulated just like a stock would be regulated. So there's a few exceptions to that designated for real estate. So you have to make sure that your business is set up to follow into those designations that allow you to invest in real estate. But what we did was we reached out to an attorney that knows specifically syndications. He only does syndication paperwork. So this guy's an expert, and you want to work with an expert. You don't want to just hire any real estate attorney because it's not very common that an attorney does this type of work. So you want to make sure you get somebody that knows what they're doing, help you avoid all those risks, because if you just, get a normal LLC and don't have the proper paperwork in place and something goes wrong with the investment, then those investors are going to come to sue you, and that paperwork's there to protect you and against them and the SEC.
Right. So is a syndication, is that the same thing as a REIT?
They are very, very similar. So I would look at a REIT as kind of like a public version of a syndication in that it's publicly traded on the stock market. Mm-hmm. But the benefits are really similar in that some of the benefits from owning real estate tax wise and that sort of thing you're able to take advantage of through investing in a REIT. The difference between a REIT and syndication is mostly scale. REITs on a lot bigger scale, syndication is more smaller scale.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Anything last kind of words you want to give people on financing? Any kind of tips or gold nugget you want to leave them?
Yeah, I would just say reach out to other investors, see how they're getting financing in your area. If you don't have a ton of experience, you may want to just start with getting like a normal like Freddie Fannie loan that would just be kind of like, a normal loan you would get on your residential house. It may be good to just start there so you can understand what the type of things that they're looking for, what kind of paperwork you have to turn in, and that sort of thing. That way you can kind of crawl before you start walking in terms of getting financing. But also just reaching out to other investors, trying to partner with somebody. I didn't have a ton of cash when I got started, so I'm partnering with somebody that has cash and somebody that has a balance sheet that they can show to a bank that you can get approved for a loan. Really, really helps.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us again, Kirby. We really appreciate it. And again, you just drop a lot of wisdom on us, and we appreciate it. And I know the audience does. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian.